Hercule Poirot and the Fallen Actor's Staff. Chapter 1. The Last Act of Lord Delamain. The night at the La Marquise Theatre had begun with an air of almost electric anticipation. In the heart of Paris, between golden columns and red velvets, high society gathered to witness the final work of the legendary actor Julien Delamain, The Broken Mirror, a dark piece about betrayal, revenge, and the illusion of truth. Delamain, known as much for his acting genius as his temperamental whims, had announced his retirement just a week ago, declaring that this would be his eternal farewell to the stage. It was a dramatic statement, even for him, at 67 years old. With his silver hair and deep voice, he still retained a presence that eclipsed his younger colleagues. The performance passed without incident until the final act. It was then, at the climax of the play, that Delamain, with his silver-handled cane in hand, had to give his final monologue in front of the stage mirror. But what followed was not in the script. With a voice that was barely a whisper, the actor spoke his last lines, staggered for an instant, and fell to the ground with a theatricality that drew initial applause, until his co-star, Clara Dussault, knelt down next to him and screamed in unmistakable panic, "It's not moving! Julien! Julien!" The curtain fell immediately. In the ensuing chaos, a doctor was called. The diagnosis was quick. Julien Delamain was dead. At first, everyone thought of a natural tragedy, a heart attack perhaps, but in the dressing room, disturbing details were found. His cane, an inseparable object of the actor on and off stage, had a slight crack in the handle, and inside a pasty bluish substance. The doctor, smelling it, frowned. "This is no coincidence," he murmured. "This is poison." The theatre director, the nervous Monsieur Gautier, asked that the press not be informed yet. "Out of respect for Delmar," he said. But everyone knew he feared for the theatre's reputation. It was then that a young woman in a green hat, who had been sitting in the private box, discreetly descended the stairs and murmured something in the police inspector's ear. "I think we should call Hercule Poirot." And so, behind the scenes drenched in mystery, closed curtains and a cane that hid death, another case began for the master of deduction. Chapter 2. Poirot's arrival. The next morning, the sky over Paris dawned covered by grey clouds, as if the city itself had decided to mourn the death of its most famous actor. At 9 o'clock, a black taxi stopped in front of the main entrance of the La Marquise Theatre. From him descended a short man, perfectly dressed in a wool coat, a bowler hat, and a carefully waxed moustache that seemed to defy the laws of symmetry. "My God, what a melodramatic scene!" murmured Hercule Poirot, adjusting his leather gloves with surgical precision. "A crime on stage, an irony as fine as Belgian lace." Waiting for him next to the door was Inspector Lefebvre, a tall man with an angular face and a poorly concealed impatience for the detective's fame. "Monsieur Poirot," he said with a cordial but not warm handshake, "thank you for coming so soon. The press will find out any minute now, and I need their judgment before this becomes just another spectacle." Poirot nodded politely, but his eyes were already exploring the facade of the theatre, as if the bricks could tell him secrets. The body still in the dressing room? No. He was taken to the morgue this morning for an autopsy, but the dressing room remains sealed as you requested in your telegram. The two of them walked through the silent hallway. The echo of his footsteps on the muffled carpet was the only sound, as if the theatre held its breath at the detective show. Arrival. Framed portraits of past works hung on the walls. Delamain in various roles, from tragic kings to jilted lovers. The actor's presence still seemed to haunt the building. "Tell me, Inspector, the facts as you know them," requested Poirot, as they ascended a slightly creaking side staircase. The death occurred during the final act. At first, no one thought it was real, of course. Delamain fell as if he had rehearsed it. It was Miss Clara Dussault who raised the alarm. The curtain was immediately closed, and a doctor was called from the audience. He was the one who noticed suspicious signs on the cane, which was still in the deceased's hand. A blue substance hidden inside the handle. According to the doctor, it appears to be some kind of concentrated poison. "Curious," Poirot muttered, pausing for a moment in the hallway to look at an old poster where Julien Delamain played Hamlet. "To be or not to be, huh?" The dressing room was guarded by a young agent, who stood at attention when he saw them. Lefebvre took out the key and slowly turned the handle. The air inside the room was thick, as if the atmosphere itself refused to abandon the fallen actor. It was a large dressing room, decorated with theatrical taste. Crimson velvet curtains, a large mirror, surrounded by opaque light bulbs, and the lingering aroma of makeup, talcum powder, and expensive cologne. On a side table, the script of The Broken Mirror, an open pocket watch, and a half-finished glass of cognac. Poirot moved slowly, as if afraid of disturbing the scene. He looked at each object without touching anything. Then he approached the baton, carefully placed on a metal tray by the police. He examined it with narrowed eyes, as if seeing beyond the polished wood and ornate handle. "A very personal cane," he commented quietly. "Mr. Delamain wore it not out of necessity, but out of style. A power accessory, and no one else touched it. That night? Not according to the testimonies. The cane was on stage when the play began, and he picked it up himself before going on stage for his monologue." Poirot pursed his lips. "Then we must ask ourselves, who had access to the stage before the final act? And why poison the staff? It is an indirect, risky method. Very little, how to say it, efficient." Lefebvre nodded, crossing his arms. "We are interrogating the theatre staff. Everyone is still here. Actors, stage hands, makeup artists. No one has been out since last night. Do you want to start interviews?" Poirot turned to him with a smile that barely curved his lips. "Yes, but first I want to speak with Miss Dussault, the scene partner, the one who screamed. Do you think she's lying?" "Not necessarily. But a woman on stage performs for the audience, even when she thinks she's alone. I want to observe it closely." A subtle silence fell between them. Poirot turned for the last time towards the dressing-room mirror. A very thin crack crossed it, barely visible, like a scar in the reflection. "Curious," he whispered. "The broken mirror indeed." While Lefebvre gave instructions to bring Clara Dussault, Poirot adjusted the cuffs of his shirt with mathematical precision. The game had begun, and in his mind the small grey cells were already spinning, connecting scattered fragments searching for the invisible pattern behind the theatre of death. Chapter 3. Clara and the Secrets of the Curtain. Clara Dussault entered the dressing-room with restrained steps and a face carefully sculpted between sorrow and composure. She was still dressed in part of her stage costume, a long black velvet coat over a pearl grey dress, and a hairstyle so perfectly maintained that she seemed to refuse to accept the chaos of the previous night. Only his eyes, heavy with fatigue, revealed that he had not slept. Poirot, standing by the cracked mirror, nodded to her. "Mademoiselle Dussault, I appreciate your time in such a painful situation." She responded with a slight nod, crossing her arms as she sat in front of the dresser. She looked at her reflection for a moment, as if trying to decide who she was at that moment. The actress, the witness, or something else. "Didn't expect to see you so soon," he murmured. "Although I suppose it was inevitable. When there is a crime, sooner or later it appears the famous Poirot. No? Ah, mademoiselle, you flatter me," he responded with a discreet smile. "Although, in reality, I only come when I am called. Like actors, I only go on stage when the script demands it." She raised an eyebrow, amused despite everything. "And what role has I played, monsieur? The innocent damsel? The tragic suspect?" "That depends on the role you decide to play," replied Poirot. "I am not directing this play, mademoiselle. I just watch her carefully." A measured silence settled between them. Poirot took the opportunity to sit down next to him in a low chair. He took out his notebook, but wrote nothing. "Tell me what you saw last night, not as an actress, but as Clara Dussault, the woman behind the character." Clara sighed, looking down at their clasped hands. "It was as always. We have been rehearsing this play for months. Julien, he was demanding, sometimes unbearable, but also a genius. Everything revolved around him, and he knew it. His cane, his voice, his damn rhythm. No one dared to challenge him on stage." Poirot nodded slowly, and off stage she hesitated. Also, he always had to have the last word, even in the dressing-room. Arguments were not uncommon. With me, with Gautier, with young Pierre, even with his former wife, who still visited him from time to time. Poirot cocked his head with interest. "Delamain? Was she here last night? Not that I know of, but it appeared a week ago. They came to leave him some documents. It was a tense scene." Clara hesitated for a moment. "I think Julien wasn't quite right. He was more paranoid than usual. He said someone was watching him, that his staff had been touched. He even demanded that the prop man store it in a locked box when not in use." Poirot straightened slightly. "And that was fulfilled? Ask Armand, the prop man. He had it under his responsibility. But last night was different. Julien asked to have it with him all the time. He said he didn't trust anyone. Curious. A man who fears being poisoned and ends up being poisoned. Are you suggesting that Julien knew they were going to kill him?" Clara asked, her face pale. "I'm not implying it. I hear it in your words. And in theirs." Clara looked at him intensely, but said nothing. He just looked away at the broken mirror. "Are you also investigating that?" he asked with a softer voice. Poirot turned his head briefly towards the crack in the glass. "Yeah, A crack in a mirror is always symbolic, don't you think? A fractured image, like the truth when viewed from the wrong angle. Clara then stood up with a sudden movement, walking towards the corner where her stagecoat was still hanging. "May I go, Monsieur Poirot? I'm tired, and I don't feel comfortable. Here." "Of course, mademoiselle." "But one last question. When Julien fell, you screamed loudly. Was it for the character or for yourself?" She stopped dead. He didn't turn around, but his voice was clear and controlled. "Don't know. Maybe for both. When you live on stage, you no longer fully distinguish the difference." And with that, he left the dressing room, leaving behind him a faint scent of lilac perfume, and a feeling that he had said less than he knew. Poirot remained motionless for a few seconds. Then, without raising his voice, he murmured, "Lefebvre, I want to talk to the prop man. Armand, let them bring it right away. I think the staff is no longer silent." Chapter 4. The Utility Man and the Closed Box. Armand was a short, stocky man with large, calloused hands that spoke of years raising curtains, nailing sets, and carrying stage props like they were sacks of flour. He was wearing a grey jacket stained with stage dust, and had the hardened expression of someone who has seen too many backstage dramas to be impressed by one more. They led him to the main dressing room, now converted into an improvised interrogation centre. Poirot, standing next to the cane on its metal tray, received it with a wave of his hand. "Monsieur Armand, I appreciate your presence. I know you must be exhausted, like everyone who loves this theatre. But I need your help with something very precise." Armand nodded without ceremony, and without waiting for an invitation, sat down on a stool next to the coat rack. "Just say, I don't want trouble. I just do my job. That's precisely why I'm calling you. I need to understand how Monsieur Delmar's props were handled, especially his cane." Armand frowned as he looked at him. "That damn stick!" he growled. "Sorry, Mr. Poirot, but you were more capricious than a cat in winter. It was no ordinary cane. Julien demanded that I treat him as if he were a royal jewel. Every night after rehearsal, I had to wipe it with a velvet cloth and put it in a locked box." "A box? Where is that box?" "In my little room, under the stage. I've had it for months. I keep the key with me here," he said, taking it out of an inside pocket sewn clumsily into his shirt. Julien didn't want anyone else to touch her. Neither Clara, nor Gautier, nor anyone. "And last night?" asked Poirot, with a sharp gleam in his eye. "Last night was strange. Julien personally came to collect the cane 2 hours before the performance. He said he wanted it with him. I took it out, gave it to him in his dressing room, and he signed a little piece of paper that we used to record that kind of thing. All very formal, but I was nervous, more than usual. He closed the dressing room door and did not come out for more than an hour. And during that time, someone else could have entered? Don't know. Nobody told me anything. But look, Mr. Poirot, everyone here knows each other. The dressing rooms don't have strong locks, you know what I mean. If someone had wanted to come in, an excuse was enough. A message, a script change, anything." Poirot nodded slowly. "And the paper that Monsieur Delamain signed, do you still have it?" Armand stood up without saying a word, took a cardboard folder from his backpack and rummaged through crumpled papers and decoration schemes. Finally, he took out a sheet of paper with strong and haughty handwriting. "I receive the baton tonight at 7:05 p.m. J.D." Poirot took it delicately and examined it. Then he looked at the clock hanging on the wall. An hour and a half before his death. Yeah. After that, I didn't see the staff again until everything fell apart. Literally. And did you notice anything strange about him? Any damage? Any difference? Armand shook his head vigorously. Nothing. It was, as always, bright, heavy, solid. Julian checked it every night. He was superstitious. He said that if he didn't touch it before going on stage, the audience would notice. Superstitious? A lot. He couldn't stand broken mirrors, black cats, or white tulips. He said they foreshadowed misfortune. If the mirror cracked, believe me, it wasn't him. Poirot narrowed his eyes. Who had access to the dressing room while he was getting ready? Clara, sometimes. Also Pierre, the young actor who plays his son in the play. Gautier passed by often, and Marianne, the makeup artist. But no one else. And you? Didn't you ever come in during the show? Never. I take care of changing scenes and lights. I stay down with the technicians. Poirot closed his notebook. Thank you, Monsieur Armand. One last thing. Could you take me to see the box where you kept the cane? The prop man nodded. With Lefebvre following them, they descended a narrow side staircase to the basement of the theatre. There, among rolled curtains and dusty cables, Armand opened the door to a small maintenance room. In the corner, on a wooden bench, was a blackened box with gold details. He opened it with the key and showed the inside. Velvet lining, supportive lace, the smell of varnish. Everything intact, said Armand. Poirot inspected carefully. Then, running his finger along the inside edge, he paused. For a moment, something stuck to his glove. A small white speck, almost invisible, like traces of fine powder. Was this here before? Don't know. I don't clean the inside, just the cane. Poirot collected the speck in a handkerchief and put it away without further comment. As they went up again, Lefebvre asked him in a low voice, "Do you think Armand is involved?" "Non, non, mon ami," whispered Poirot. "This man is honest, although rough. But what he has given me is not a confession, but a possibility. Someone had access, someone with motivation, and above all, someone who knew how to manipulate the symbolic." Lefebvre frowned. "The symbolic? Yes." Poirot smiled. "Because this is not just a crime. It is a staging." Chapter 5. The Young Actor and the Shadow of the Father. Pierre Vaillant was waiting in the theatre lobby, sitting in a worn armchair next to the poster for the latest production. He was a young man with an angular face, his jaw always tense, as if he were fighting something he never said out loud. His fingers drummed on his knee with restrained nervousness, and when Poirot approached, he stopped them instantly, as if he had been discovered in a criminal act. "Monsieur Vaillant," Poirot greeted politely, "I thank you for your patience. I would like to speak with you about your relationship with Monsieur Delamain." Pierre stood up, uncomfortable. His voice, although clear, barely trembled. "Clear. I have nothing to hide." Poirot indicated a nearby sofa, and they sat facing each other, separated by a low table with the remains of programs and a withered flower in a forgotten vase. "You played your son in the play, didn't you?" Yeah, it was my role, and I was also off stage. In a way, Poirot raised an eyebrow. In a way, Pierre looked up at the ceiling lamp. Julien Delamain was my biological father, although he never legally recognized it. My mother was one of his conquests in his glory years, a provincial actress who believed in her promises. When I was born, he was already married. I sent him money for a while, but he never called me by my name. He never hugged me. I was just a forgotten matter. Poirot nodded slowly. The atmosphere in the hall became denser, as if silence weighed on the old furniture. And how did you come to work with him? Pierre let out a bitter laugh. Fate, irony? Call it what you want. I showed up for an audition without knowing it. Was his company. He recognized me immediately. He looked at me as if I were a bad memory. But he didn't reject me. On the contrary, he gave me the closest role, his son's. And that generated resentment. Pierre narrowed his eyes, his expression containing years of frustration. Do you think not? Of course, but I never wished death on him. I just wanted to show him that I was better than he thought, that I could be at his level. And did he achieve it? Don't know. Julien did not give praise. He didn't even hint at them. On stage he was cold, sometimes cruel. He corrected me in front of everyone. He once told me that if I died in the second act, the audience wouldn't notice. Poirot watched him in silence. Then he said softly, "Where were you during the hour before the performance last night?" "In my dressing room. Checking lines, listening to music. Some technicians can confirm this. I didn't move from there." "Did you visit Delamain's dressing room?" "No, I had no reason. Not even to talk to him about some scene, some last-minute modification. With Julien, that was not done. Everything had to follow the exact script. Improvising was sacrilege." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "And did you know that Monsieur Delamain had recently received a visit from his ex-wife?" Pierre tensed. I heard him comment, "I guess she came for money. They always came for that." Julien was not generous, neither with his wives nor with his bastards. Poirot narrowed his eyes. Curious choice of words. "It's the truth," Pierre replied, and for the first time his voice hardened. "But if you think that makes me suspicious, go ahead, investigate me. I have nothing to hide." "Oh, mon cher, I don't doubt it," said Poirot, rising. "But in my experience, often what men don't hide is the least relevant. It's what they hide behind their anger that interests me." Pierre stared at him, but this time he didn't respond. Poirot left him sitting there, with his fists clenched on his knees, lost in thoughts that smacked more of sadness than anger. Back in the main dressing room, Lefebvre approached with his notebook. "Well?" Poirot raised his shoulders. "An unrecognized son, a simmering resentment, a young talent who seeks approval and finds contempt. It's not a direct motivation to murder, but to hold a grudge," Lefebvre completed. Poirot nodded, but not entirely convinced. No, resentment, yes, but not the kind of resentment that plans a symbolic staged murder. This crime was executed as if it were part of the script. And Pierre, he acts from the wound, not from the calculation. Lefebvre rubbed his chin. "So we rule it out?" "Not so fast, mon ami. Nobody is ruled out yet. But I think it's time to change perspective. I want to talk to someone who's not on stage, someone who watches from the sidelines and sees more than meets the eye." "Who?" Poirot turned to him with a discreet smile. "Mrs. Marianne Duval, makeup artist. If anyone knows the real faces under the masks, it's her." Chapter 6. Brushes, Shadows and Confessions. Marianne Duval's dressing room did not have the luxury of Delamain's, nor the theatricality of Clara's. It was functional space, organized with an almost surgical meticulousness. Clean brushes, pigments classified by shade, and small hand-labeled bottles were lined up on the table. The air smelled of rice powder, rose water, and discretion. Poirot entered alone. Marianne was waiting for him, sitting in front of her mirror, without makeup, with the serene face of someone who has learned to see without being seen. Her brown hair was tied back in a simple bun, and her deeply observant eyes fixed on Poirot with a mixture of respect and caution. "Monsieur Poirot," she said softly, "is it my turn to go on stage too?" Poirot smiled slightly. "Oh no, mademoiselle, you were already in it, only in the shadows, and in my experience, that's where the details that solve the mysteries are hidden." Marianne invited him to sit down. He accepted and, with an almost reverent gesture, looked over the dressing table. An impeccable order, very admirable. The face of an actor is a battlefield. "But mine," she said, pointing to her table, "is a temple. Here each tool has its purpose, each shadow its intention." Poirot nodded. "That is precisely why I came. You see everyone before they come. On stage, see their unfiltered eyes, their tremors, their involuntary grimaces. Did you notice anything strange last night?" Marianne clasped her hands thoughtfully. "More than one thing. Julian was weird, reserved. She didn't argue with me about makeup, which she did every night. She used to complain about the shine, the foundation, the intensity of the eyes. But yesterday he sat silently. He looked at me in the mirror and said, 'Today I will be the broken mirror. Don't make me up as a hero. Make me up as a traitor.'" Poirot raised an eyebrow. "And how did you interpret that?" "As a metaphor, I supposed." Julian spoke like that when he wanted to sound profound, but also he seemed to be saying goodbye. Not from me, of something bigger. "And anyone else? Did you notice changes in the other actors?" Clara was nervous, but she always is on opening nights. Pierre's eyes were swollen, as if he hadn't slept. But that's not new either. The only one who was different was Gautier. "The director?" "Yeah. He came into my dressing room before the show started. It never does. He asked me for cologne water. He said he wanted to cool off, but he was sweating as if he had a fever. His hands were shaking. And did he say anything else? No. He just asked if Julian was ready. I told him no, that he was still locked in his dressing room. Then he left. He looked scared." Poirot narrowed his eyes. A line of curiosity was beginning to emerge. "Have you ever seen Gautier argue with Delamain?" "Several times. They were like two roosters in the same cage. Julian believed that he should direct the play from the stage. Gautier tolerated it, but he was at the limit. A few days ago, I heard him say, 'One of these days, that cane is going to swallow him.'" "Interesting choice of words," Poirot murmured. And that night, did you go into Delmain's dressing room? No, he didn't call me. In fact, it was the first time in a long time that she didn't touch up her makeup before going on stage. Do you know if anyone did visit him? I didn't see it, but I heard. My dressing room is next door. I heard voices very low. I can't say for sure, but I would say that one of them was Clara's, or maybe his ex-wife's. They have similar tones. Cold Poirot wrote something down in his notebook. Then he looked up. Mademoiselle Duval, what do you think of the cane? She smiled barely. The cane was another character. Julien treated him as an extension of himself. It was his symbol of power, of presence. He caressed it, raised it like a scepter. If someone wanted to hurt Julien, the cane was the perfect place to hide a blow. And did everyone know it? Yeah, we all knew it. Poirot rose slowly. Thank you, mademoiselle. You don't just apply makeup. You see masks, and sometimes it helps to remove them. And you, Monsieur Poirot? She asked, smiling gently. Do you also use one? Always, he replied with a slight bow. But mine is logical. He left the dressing room with a firm step, leaving Marianne surrounded by shadows and brushes. In the hallway, Lefebvre was waiting for him with a frown. Any revelation? Several clues. But they are still loose. I need to understand something more. Symbolic. This crime has its own language. A theatrical one. A murder carried out not with violence, but with the intention of spectacle. Next step. Poirot stopped next to the poster for the play, The Broken Mirror, and watched him in silence. I want to see the complete script. The play that Julien wrote, maybe it wasn't just fiction. Maybe it was a confession. Chapter 7. The Broken Mirror Script. The office of Gautier, the director of the La Marquise Theatre, was located on the top floor, a high corner overlooking the grey skyline of Paris. It was a spare space, with shelves filled with annotated scripts, photographs of past productions, and a walnut desk that seemed too heavy to ever move. Poirot entered unannounced, accompanied by Inspector Lefebvre, and found Gautier bending over a pile of papers, his face lined with lines of tension. He sat up immediately, wiping his hands with a handkerchief, as if to hide his nervousness. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector, what can I do for you? We want the original script of The Broken Mirror, said Poirot politely but bluntly. All text, with annotations if possible. Gautier hesitated for a second. Clear. Yes, of course. It's on the shelf by the window. He took out a copy bound in black covers. Poirot received it with both hands, as if it were a relic. He opened it and turned the pages slowly, reverently. The script was full of notes in the margins, in different inks. Some clearly from the director, others more firm, with angular handwriting. Those of Julien Delamain. He rewrote his own text, asked Poirot without looking up. Constantly. Julien did not believe in definitive versions. He said that stage perfection had to change every night. It was torment to work like that. But it was also what made him a genius. Poirot leafed through until he reached the final act, the monologue. His eyes stopped on a line underlined 3 times. The reflection does not lie, but it does not reveal the whole truth either. This Wasn't in the preliminary versions, was it? Gautier frowned. No. He added that a week ago. He insisted on repeating that phrase twice. He said it was the backbone of the act. Poirot murmured, almost to himself, the partial truth, the broken mirror, the hidden murderer behind the staging. Lefebvre moved forward a little. Do you mean that the work contains an encrypted message? Maybe not a message, but a symbolic confession. Julien was obsessed with the reflection, with what the public sees and with what it does not see. His cane was part of his character, yes, but also a conduit, an instrument, an emotional anchor. Poirot closed the libretto slowly. Inspector, I need a list of all the people who knew about the recent changes to the text. Not the version given to the actors, but this one, the private one, the one that only Delamain and perhaps Gautier knew. Gautier raised his hands, uncomfortable. No one else saw her. I helped him type his notes, but the rest of the cast worked with a clean version. And that clean version? Asked Poirot. It's in the production office. I can bring it. Do it, please. As Gautier hurried out, Poirot leafed through the pages of the final act again. Look at this, Lefebvre, he said in a low voice. In the scene just before the monologue, the main character says, I have been betrayed by the one who helped me shine. The hand that beautifies me poisons me. Lefebvre raised his eyebrows. An allusion to Marianne? Or a more general insinuation? But it is not a coincidence. Julien was not an emotional improviser. Every word of his had weight. When Gautier returned with the script clean, Poirot compared both versions. The difference was subtle but significant. The final speech was cut. The phrase reflection that does not reveal the whole truth was not there. Nor the line about the betrayal of the hand that beautifies. This is very revealing, said Poirot, closing both librettos. Julien said more on stage than he let others know. And most importantly, he said it as if he knew it was his last performance. Do you think he foresaw his death? Lefebvre asked. Not only that, I think he was looking for her. Somehow, it provoked her. Julien Delamain turned his murder into a final act. Planned or not, he knew that the stage was the only place where he would die as who he really was. Gautier, pale, murmured, That's very Julien. Poirot turned towards the window. Paris, grey and distant, seemed to be waiting for something. This crime will not be solved with fingerprints or poisons. It will be resolved the way a play is resolved, understanding the subtext. And the subtext, Inspector, is always in the eyes of those who look from the shadows. So, what's the next step? Poirot turned, his eyes shining with the conviction of someone who has already begun to see the thread hidden behind the scenes. We will call all the actors tonight. We will rehearse a scene, not from the script, but from the crime. I want to see their gestures, their silences, and their fear, because someone on this cast knows exactly what happened. And this time there will be no curtain to hide it. Shall we move forward with the Chapter 8, Rehearsal for a Murderer? Chapter 8, Rehearsal for a Murderer. The main hall of the La Marquise Theatre was empty, except for the minimal rehearsal lights and the echo of footsteps bouncing off the unoccupied seats. It was already night, and outside, Paris was sleeping under a slow drizzle, but inside the theatre, something more than a performance was about to be performed. Poirot, standing in the centre of the stage, watched as the actors arrived one by one. Clara Dussault, with a long coat and taut lips. Pierre Vaillant, looking at the ground. Gautier, uncomfortable, cleaning his glasses. Marianne Duval, serene as always, and Armand the prop man, behind the scenes, observing without intervening. Everyone knew why they were there. Nobody asked. Lefebvre, from the front row, took notes in silence. Poirot raised his hands and spoke calmly, but with a firm voice, projected in the style of an experienced director. Mesdames et messieurs, tonight we will not repeat a work written by Julien Delamain. No, tonight we will reenact the minutes that led to his death. An uncomfortable whisper ran through the group. Don't be alarmed, he continued. This is not an accusation, but an observation. I want to see how they moved that night, how they communicated, how they looked at each other. Clara frowned. What if we don't remember everything precisely? Then, improvise. May your bodies remember what words forget. Crime, after all, is not just an act. It is choreography. Clara and Pierre exchanged a quick look. Gautier crossed his arms, clearly displeased. Marianne remained near the curtain, unmoved. Poirot placed the cane, a replica, not the original centre of the stage. Everything starts here. Julien enters for his final scene. Where were each of you minutes before? Pierre stepped forward and stood to the left of the stage. I was waiting for my entry into the shadows. Over there. Clara went to the far right. I had already left the scene and was on the side, observing. Gautier stayed close to the hallway. I was backstage, monitoring the latest light changes. Poirot watched them. Their positions fit with their previous statements. He turned to Marianne. And you? Behind the set, near the dressing rooms. Poirot walked slowly, measuring each step. Very good. Now, let's say someone, one of you, wanted access to the cane. Remember that Julien had taken it in his dressing room an hour before. But he could have left it on this same table, in the shadows of the curtain. He pointed to a side table, placed as part of the set. Everyone looked towards her. The Tuscarun doesn't see it, but any of you in a brief movement could touch it, change it, adulterate it, Lefebvre murmured from his seat. Are you implying that the poison was applied here? Poirot did not answer. I was just observing. Pierre moved slightly. Clara swallowed. Gautier let out an audibly irritated sigh. Poirot then raised his cane. Julien picked it up just before his monologue. He walked to the front of the stage, raised it theatrically, and spoke his last lines. Then he fell. Silence. Poirot walked towards Clara. Mademoiselle Dussault, you were the one who screamed. Yeah, repeat it, just like he did then. She hesitated, but finally raised her voice. Julien! Julien, please! Poirot interrupted her. Too clear, too direct. Remember, it was a time of confusion, mix of acting and reality. Clara lowered her voice and repeated, Julien. No, he's not moving. Poirot nodded. Exactly. That was the key. No one knew for seconds if it was part of the play. And those seconds are valuable. The killer needed them, because he didn't kill out of simple hatred. No, he killed so that the public could see a stage god die. It was an act of punishment. Everyone was silent. Pierre was breathing heavily. Gautier was white. Marianne still did not change her position. Poirot stepped to the centre of the stage, and for the first time his voice became serious. The poison was applied not in the dressing room, but on this stage. The cane was clean when it came out of its box, but someone manipulated it minutes before the final act. Someone who had access, who knew the movements, who knew that Delamain would never inspect him at this point. And who? Gautier asked almost in a whisper. Poirot looked directly at him. Someone who knew each of the steps of the work, because he lived it from behind everyone. He turned slowly to Marianne Duval. Mademoiselle Duval, come with me to the dressing room, s'il vous plaît. There's something else I want to go over with you. She didn't flinch. He just said, Of course, Monsieur Poirot. As they both left the stage, the others remained silent, staring at the staff as if it had suddenly come to life. Lefebvre looked at them one by one. The crime was no longer a memory. It had become present. And in that moment, for the first time since Delamain fell to the ground, someone in that group began to shake. Chapter 9. The Colour of Silence. Julien Delmain's dressing room felt colder that night. The light bulbs around the mirror were not on, and the shadows cast by the closed curtains stretched across the carpet like mourning veils. Marianne Duval entered without hesitation, with a firm step. Poirot followed her with the calm of one who has arranged each checker on the board and is about to make the final move. She didn't ask why he had brought her. He just stopped in front of the broken mirror and stared at it as if waiting for something, to emerge from inside it. "Why here, Monsieur Poirot?" he said at last. "Because Julien Delamain died here," answered Poirot, "and because it all started here." Marianne slowly turned towards him. "I didn't kill him. I never said yes," replied Poirot calmly. "But he hasn't said everything he knows either." Marianne sighed. His eyes were two wells of tense calm. "And what do you think I know?" Poirot walked towards the dressing table. She grabbed a makeup brush, one she'd used countless times, and held it between her fingers as if it were a pen of evidence. The substance found on the cane was not a common poison. It was a powdery greyish-blue compound that is only activated by contact with moisture. Someone had to apply it very carefully, without leaving visible traces. You, mademoiselle, have experience working with pigments, powders, and precision. That's true, he admitted, but others knew it too. The stagehands, even the props. I'm not the only one with delicate hands. Poirot nodded. No, but she was the only one who had intimate access to Julien, without him suspecting. The only one who could touch her personal belongings without raising alarm. Because, as you said yourself, you embellished it. And as in his work, the hand that beautifies can betray. Marianne looked at him for a long time. Then she walked over to the dressing table and sat down in front of the cracked mirror. He touched the crack with a finger, gently. "Do you know when this mirror broke?" "I imagine the night of the crime." "No, it was 2 weeks ago. Julien broke it with one blow. He was furious. He had received a letter. I don't know who, but I remember how I was shaking. He said that someone was going to expose him. that his career was worthless without his cane, without his final act. Poirot narrowed his eyes. "And you saw that letter?" "No, but I found the torn envelope in the trash. No sender. And you confronted him?" Marianne shook her head. "With what right? Julian was never mine. I was just his shadow, your accomplice in make-up. Sometimes his confidant, never his equal." Poirot looked down at the brush still in his hand. "Marianne, how do you feel about Julien Delamain?" She was slow to respond. Piety, admiration, rage. I loved him, in silence. How to love the impossible. Poirot put the brush down on the table. "He knew they wanted him dead, and you didn't do anything. He did what he knew how to do best. He turned it into a scene. He wrote his death with the same hand with which he created art. The staff was his throne and his tomb. He offered his life as if it were a last act." Marianne looked at herself in the mirror again. "So, you think I helped him die?" "No," answered Poirot. "I think you protected someone." She stayed very still. "Whom?" "To whom he applied the poison." Marianne stood up slowly. His lips trembled. "If you know who it was, why did you bring me here?" "Because you, mademoiselle, have witnessed many masks. And now it's time to remove one more. Not for me, by Julian." She closed her eyes. "I didn't touch it that night, but I saw something. I saw Clara sneak into her dressing room before the second act. I saw her leave nervous. He had loved her once, you know, not as an actress, as a woman, and she had rejected him. I feared him. He couldn't stand it. And do you think she—" "Don't know. But he knew him well enough to know that the staff was the key to everything." Poirot nodded silently. "Thank you, mademoiselle. What you said tonight is more than enough." Marianne took her coat from the coat rack. As he passed Poirot, he briefly touched his arm. "Sometimes, Monsieur Poirot, make-up does not disguise, it reveals," and he left. Poirot was left alone in the dressing-room. He approached the broken mirror and looked at himself, observing his fragmented reflection. His voice, barely a whisper, floated through the room. The hand that applied the poison did not seek to kill. He sought to punish. And punishment, when given from love, is the cruelest of all. He closed the door softly behind him. Shall we move forward with the Chapter 10? Final meeting on stage? Chapter 10. Final meeting on stage. The large stage lamp of the La Marquise Theatre hung like a silent eye over the empty stage. The seats were still empty, but this time there was no rehearsal or audience. There was trial. Poirot asked everyone to meet there, as was the tradition in his investigations. A closed circle. The masks on the verge of breaking. Emotions on the verge of overflowing. Clara Dussault arrived first, elegantly dressed, as if her every movement had a scenic intention. Pierre Vaillant followed him, his jaw clenched and his hands in his pockets. Gautier, less arrogant than usual, sat down without saying a word. Marianne Duval, serene, stood in the background in the shadows of the scenes. Armand, the prop man, remained close to the curtain, observing without intervening. Poirot took the stage with a slow, meticulous step. At his side, Lefebvre carried a folder of documents and a sealed envelope. "Mes amis," began Poirot, in a clear voice. "We have performed many scenes in this theatre, but none as real as this one. The murder of Julien Delamain was not just a crime. It was a masterpiece of symbolism, passion, and revenge." Nobody spoke. Only the echoes of the theatre responded. "I have heard your versions. I have observed their gestures, their omissions, and above all, their emotions, and it is in those cracks where the truth seeps." Poirot walked over to the cane, placed on a side table like a sacred relic. This cane was not just any object. He was a totem, an extension of Delmain's ego. That's why he used it until the end, and that is why it was the vehicle chosen for his death. He turned to Clara. "Mademoiselle Dussault, you were the last person to enter Julien's dressing room before the final act." She blinked, but didn't deny. "I went to talk to him. He asked me to see him before his scene. He said he needed to apologize. It was a short conversation. And he was alone." "Yeah. And did you touch the cane?" "No. He had it on the table next to the glass of cognac. I didn't get close." Poirot nodded. However, someone did. Someone who knew not to apply the poison before the staff left the box. Someone who needed, a few seconds unseen, to rub an imperceptible dust on the silver hilt. He then looked towards Gautier. "Monsieur Gautier, you said you were monitoring lights, but according to the testimony of Marianne Duval, you were agitated, nervous, and tried to enter the dressing room minutes before the final act began." Gautier swallowed. "I passed by there, yes, but I didn't go in. I heard voices and left. That's all." "What voices?" "Don't know. Clara, perhaps, or Pierre. I'm not sure." "Convenient," said Poirot. "How convenient is that you were the one who typed the clean version of the script, the one that omitted certain lines, lines that turned Julien into a tragic character, even a confessor." "Are you implying that I killed him for censorship?" exclaimed Gautier. "Don't talk nonsense." Poirot did not flinch, not because of censorship, no, but yes, for something more subtle. "You were afraid that Julien would reveal something else on stage. Not about his character, about you." He turned to Pierre. "Monsieur Vaillant." His resentment towards Julien was obvious. His status as an unrecognized son, his constant humiliation, isn't that reason enough? Pierre gritted his teeth. "I wanted to kill him, yes. I wanted to yell at him for everything I never said. But I didn't do it. And I swear on my mother, I would never have dared to kill him. Not like that." Poirot looked at him gravely, and then passed to the centre of the stage. "The interesting thing about this crime," he said, "is that it was not carried out with impulsive violence. It was planned, calculated, performed as if it were part of the show, one more act in the great theatre of Julien Delamain." He finally turned to Marianne, who still remained in the shadows. "Mademoiselle Duval, you saw more than you first said. You didn't just hear Clara enter. He also saw her leave, and you, more than anyone, knew that Julien did not tolerate improvisation, neither in his work nor in his death." Marianne lowered her head. Poirot held up the envelope that Lefebvre had brought. He held it up. "Here, I have the complete chemical report of the residue found inside the cane, and a speck found in the prop box. does not match cosmetic products, but yes, with a theatrical pigment used in shadows for aging skin. A powder that you, mademoiselle, used on Julien every night." Marianne said nothing. His silence was a cloak. "And yet, I don't believe that you are the murderer." Everyone looked up. The tension in the air became tangible. "No," said Poirot slowly. "Marianne was an accomplice in the final scene, but not the director, and the real culprit, mes amis, is sitting among you, waiting for the curtain to come down for the last time." Everyone looked around. Nobody spoke. Poirot lowered his voice. "But not yet, mes amis. I haven't finished telling the story yet, and until the true motivations are revealed, the show is not over." Chapter 11. The Reason They Didn't Rehearse. The silence after Poirot's last words was thicker than a closed curtain. None of those present dared to move, as if every gesture could give them away. The eyes went from the cane to Poirot, from Poirot to Marianne, and from there back to Clara Dussault. She was the one who broke the stillness. "Then who did it, Monsieur Poirot?" he asked, his voice perfectly modulated. "It has already planted doubt in all of us. Are you going to say it, or will you continue playing the playwright?" Poirot came down from the stage slowly, without haste, and stopped just in front of the first row of seats. His steps echoed with the cadence of a final monologue. "No, mademoiselle, I don't play. I observe. And what I have observed is that Julien Delamain was not murdered out of revenge, nor out of jealousy, nor even out of ambition. He was killed for something more personal, something that was not in the script, but was in the subtext." He turned to everyone. The real reason was hiding in plain sight. As in great works, it is not in what is said, but in what is left unsaid. Clara raised an eyebrow. "And what did he keep quiet about?" Poirot looked directly at her. The existence of a daughter. The air seemed to rush out of the theatre. Clara paled. "That's ridiculous." "It is," interrupted Poirot with a cold look. Julien Delamain not only had an unacknowledged son with Pierre's mother, he also had a daughter with a young actress from the south of France more than 20 years ago. That daughter was raised far from the stage, far from the shine, far from humiliation, until one day she grew up, studied acting, and decided to confront the father who never recognized her, earning her place on the same stage where he reigned. Lefebvre sat up, alert. "Are you saying that Clara Dussault is not just an actress?" declared Poirot. "She is the illegitimate daughter of Julien Delamain." Clara stood up. "That doesn't prove anything. Nothing he says proves that I killed him." "Oh, no," Poirot conceded softly. "But it does explain why he would do it, not out of hate, but out of justice. Because it was not enough to unmask him in public. I wanted him to die as he had lived, on stage, surrounded by applause, fiction, masks. I wanted his death to be symbolic, as his abandonment had been." Jiff. Room remained still. Clara was breathing hard, but her face was still a perfect mask. "Julien never knew who I was. That doesn't justify." "But you did know," interrupted Poirot, "and he planned a lifetime to get to this moment. She endured him, admired him, even loved him. until he unknowingly offered her final scene. The opportunity to take away his legacy without getting your hands dirty. Marianne took a step forward. "Clara," he said, barely a whisper. Clara looked at her, and for the first time her face stopped acting. The tears were not theatrical. "I didn't touch it. I didn't put the poison. I just handed him his own tragedy. I gave it its last performance." "And who did it then?" Pierre asked, his voice breaking. "Who applied the poison?" Poirot turned slowly towards the back of the stage. Armand, the prop man, blinked, bewildered. "They? Yeah. But not of his own free will. Out of obedience. You were manipulated, mon ami. Manipulated to leave the stick unclosed in its box. To trust someone else with the key for a few minutes. Remember? Armand opened his mouth and closed his eyes. His shoulders slumped. Marianne told me that Julien wanted to change the lining, that he needed me to take the box to the back of the warehouse. It was only a minute, just one. Marianne did not deny. He didn't defend himself either. Poirot nodded sadly. Not all crimes are committed out of hate. Some are committed out of love, for those who were hurt. Marianne protected Clara. He helped execute a scene he thought was fair. But what he didn't anticipate was the weight of the silence after the applause. A final, dense silence. The theatre contained everything. Poirot turned to Lefebvre. "Inspector, you will decide how to proceed. I have already played my role." Lefebvre looked at Clara, at Marianne, at Armand, and remained silent. Sometimes even justice needs a pause. Poirot came down from the stage, slowly, like an actor who has completed his last act, before crossing the main door. He stopped, looked at the still raised curtain, and murmured, "Julien Delamain wanted to die like a myth. Someone granted it to him, but in every myth, someone pays the price for the truth," and he left. Chapter 12. Denouement. The last applause. 2 days after the on-stage reveal, life at the La Marquise Theatre had yet to return to normal. The lights were still off, rehearsals suspended. And although the crime was no longer an enigma, its consequences spread like echoes among the empty seats. Poirot, impeccably dressed, was standing by the window of his Parisian hotel, watching the rain make furrows on the glass. Disjunct in front of him, Inspector Lefebvre was leafing through documents with a serious face. "Marianne Duval has not fled," he said at last. "He showed up voluntarily this morning. He confirmed his involvement in the cover-up. He does not deny that he applied the poison, but insists that he did not do it with the intention of killing, but rather to obey Clara." Poirot nodded gently. "Clara Dussault. He denies having given the direct order. He says it was a misinterpreted gesture, that he never said do it, that he only shared his pain. Ah, but the language of pain, mon ami, is dangerous when shared with someone willing to act out. Of love," replied Poirot in a grave tone. "And what do you think? Is she guilty?" Poirot turned, resting his hands on the back of a chair. "Legal guilt and moral guilt rarely coincide, Inspector. Marianne performed the act. Clara inspired him. Julien allowed it. Lefebvre closed the folder. The prosecutor will decide how to proceed. And what about Armand? An involuntary pawn. Nobody will blame him. It was handled with skill. They were both silent for a moment. Poirot walked to the small table where a newspaper clipping lay. The headline said, "Julien Delmain's last act. Genius or martyr?" "Julien knew," said Poirot suddenly. "He knew someone wanted him dead. Marianne confirmed it to me without saying it, and instead of protecting himself, he wrote his own final scene. He prepared his fall. He left phrases as clues, changed the monologue, broke the mirror. He not only accepted his destiny, he made it his legacy." Lefebvre raised an eyebrow. You saying he caused her death?" "Not with explicit words, but with acts, with omissions, with carefully placed phrases. Julien Delmain orchestrated one last performance to ensure his death was unforgettable." Poirot finally sat down, arranging, his thoughts like chess pieces. Pierre Vaillant was cleared of suspicion, but his truth was told. Gautier was confronted, but he was not the one who wielded the invisible weapon. Marianne will live with the burden of the act. Clara, with the wound of having desired justice and received tragedy. And the cane, that cane is now more than a prop. It is a symbol, it is guilt, it is a stage. Lefebvre looked at him with a certain admiration. "And you, Poirot, how does this play end?" Poirot smiled briefly and melancholy. "With a reflection, mon ami." He stood up and walked to the window, watching the city slowly clear. Then he spoke, without turning. "We live surrounded by masks. Some we use for convenience, others for protection. But there is always a moment, a scene, a reflection, a crack in the mirror, when the truth peeks out. Sometimes it's late, sometimes it's just in time." Lefebvre nodded slowly. "Will he return to Paris, Monsieur Poirot?" "Maybe, although I prefer truths that are not represented as tragedies. I am attracted to crimes out of greed, out of vanity, not out of love. Love is the most unpredictable of motives, and the cruelest when mixed with silence." Soon after, Poirot left Paris. At the station, before boarding the train, he took out a small sheet of paper from the inside pocket of his coat. It was one of the final lines of Delmain's monologue, written in his own handwriting. The actor dies twice, once in the soul, once in the final applause. I chose when to lower the curtain. Poirot folded it carefully, put it in his suitcase, and climbed into the carriage without looking back. The train departed in clouds of steam. And so ended the last act of the great Julien Delmain, murdered with the precision of a well-spoken line, in the only place where he was always invincible, the stage. Meanwhile, far from the hustle and bustle, Hercule Poirot, with his grey cells satisfied, travelled in silence toward his next mystery.